Welcome to this amazing episode with Dr. Tom Walters. Tom is the face behind the massive social media account devoted to physical rehab called Rehab Science. He was a professor of kinesiology who discovered that he could make much more of an impact teaching in the school of life. And he uses his social media, his books, and his programs to show millions of people how they can be their own advocates to heal and move their bodies as they are meant to move, efficiently and free from pain. He is also an introvert and he is sensitive to energy, I have heard him say. So we'll talk about that. And he celebrates and addresses the whole person in his work, noting the importance of attention to the mind and the spirit, as well as the body. They all work together. And he's here to tell us about his own story and how he came to be a person who is truly making a huge positive difference in the world. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Mitzi. I'm so excited to be here, and nobody has. That's a unique introduction. I don't know how you found out about me being an introvert, but I am happy to talk about that. That's always. I feel like it's something I talk about somewhat often, especially with students. We were just talking about. Is it your daughter that's studying kinesiology? Yeah. So
Yep.
it's something that I didn't really recognize in myself when I was younger, but it's definitely been kind of a personality characteristic I've learned about myself as I've gotten older, and think it's one of those things that can be helpful to know maybe when you're starting out early on and what direction you go.
Definitely. Self-discovery is really the key to success, in my opinion. So I always start out talking to my guests about their life stories. But before we dig into that, I just wanted to mention your book to start out, because first of all, thank you for sending me. I'm holding it up for those of you who are watching on YouTube. You'll see. I love this book because it is an encyclopedia for wellness. It's definitely something I will keep on my family library. It's like a coffee table book, but yet it's also this amazing resource. And so I wanted to congratulate you on this book. It is really, really beautiful. The illustrations and everything in it. It's probably one of the nicest books I've ever seen.
Well, thank you so much.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It came out so great. My publisher really specializes in kind of these textbook size books for the regular person. And so it was kind of meant to be that, exactly what you said, kind of an encyclopedia of injuries and pain issues, so that because when we look at the research, there's so much, most things get better if you have the right information and you introduce the right movements and exercises. And that's really what physical therapy kind of revolves around. And so people, a lot of times, I talk to patients all the time now that it takes 8 weeks for them to get into physical therapy. Just, it's expensive and there's so much you can do. Most conditions, again, will get better with time and the right exercises. And the book has all that. So that was kind of the goal, was to educate people on pain injuries and then have programs that they could just start implementing. And I hope people will keep it as a coffee table book and just open it. I've got tennis elbow, I'll just open to that program, or plantar fasciitis. You can just start doing things right away. So
yeah, I think that's amazing. I think that's the thing I love most about it, is that you're being an advocate for self-healing, because we really are very powerful beings and we can learn how to heal ourselves and not have to rely on a system that requires us to wait 3 months to get an appointment for something we really need to address now.
yeah, I completely agree. If you have the right education kind of mindset, and then you just know what strategies to start implementing, you really can treat most things on your own. Healthcare is so set up as a business. So it's like, oh, you've got to come in 2 to 3 times a week for 6 to 8 weeks. And it's really just the physical therapists. We were talking before, there's a lot of problems in healthcare, and physical therapy clinics are having a hard time staying afloat because insurance companies don't want to pay them that much. So in response to that, they will just tell patients, you need to come 2 to 3 times a week for 6 to 8 weeks. And that really, I've been out of insurance for a long time now, kind of in a cash pay system. And most people who come to see me come 1 to 3 times, because I may work on them a little bit, but most of what I'm doing is helping them navigate the injury or pain issue and giving them things they can do on their own. It's about boosting self-efficacy and giving people ways to self-manage. So like you said, our bodies are amazing in their ability to heal. And if you can give it some time and introduce the right strategies, it gets better.
Mm-hmm. And also, I've read somewhere you said that you should not underestimate the power of belief.
For sure. Yeah, it's you. I think most of us think about your beliefs can be both positive and negative. We think about placebo a lot, how powerful, and there's so much. Sometimes 50% of medical interventions are cited as being heavily placebo. So if you believe something's going to have a positive effect, it definitely helps it have a positive effect. But the other side is the nocebo. And that's a lot of the reason I got started on social media, is that people would come in to see me for physical therapy, and they would have be carrying these sort of harmful beliefs that sometimes came from family, sometimes from the internet, sometimes unfortunately from other practitioners. And sometimes practitioners were just unintentionally, the language they were using, the messages they were conveying would be harmful to the person. It would give them this belief about their body or their issue they were currently facing. And those kind of negative beliefs can interfere negatively with your recovery process. So that was frustrating to me. And so a lot of it was initially getting involved in social media to sort of push back against those and just help people kind of plant seeds for more positive beliefs. And that is really true around pain. And that's the first 5 chapters of the book. I went into pain science. And the reason for that at the beginning was that if you can help people reframe pain in a more positive way, it often helps them recover better, more quickly.
Yeah, because it's a signal.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so interesting. Well, obviously, you're a person of great compassion. And so I believe that always originates in earlier parts of your life. So let's talk about your life story a bit. Where were you born?
Yeah, so I was born in Billings, Montana. So I'm Montana. I guess some people would say kind of it's kind of like the Rockies. It's kind of a Midwest type of person, I guess, in a way. But sometimes people will think I sound kind of Canadian the way I say things. So, but yeah.
Montana is,
Yep.
I've never been, but it's supposed to be such a beautiful place. It's someplace I would love to go.
Yeah, it's a beautiful state, especially the western part of Montana. Where I grew up in Billings is not, if you have to, a lot of times people fly into Billings, I would just recommend get a rental car and drive out of Billings as quickly as you can, because that part of the state is it's just not as pretty. It's more of a city. But once you get to western Montana, it's really beautiful.
That's a great place to grow up, to have access to all that.
Yeah.
When you're looking back at your life, your earliest life, what's the very first thing you remember? What's your earliest memory?
I always feel like my memory of when I was young is not that great, but I probably my earliest memories are probably, there was a period of time, even though I was born in Montana, there was a period of time where my family moved to North Dakota. And I think some of my earliest memories were just being a kid, kind of playing. We lived on this big 10-acre kind of farm. And I think those are some of my strongest early memories, are kind of running around that farm with my brother and just being kind of a really free kid. I mean, we dig for dinosaur bones and just like did all kinds of, it was just the greatest sort of existence as a kid. You just were free and had all this open space. We were just outside all day in nature, just kind of exploring and doing things. And so those are probably some of my earliest memories. That was sort of in the kind of kindergarten to 3rd grade range that I was there. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was just a great time and to this day, I really still love exploring and adventure and travel. So I think a lot of that probably comes from being able to explore as a kid.
Yeah, definitely. Do you just have one brother?
I actually have kind of a unique family. I have one full brother, one half brother, an adopted brother, and an adopted sister.
Okay.
So yeah, I have a kind of an interesting upbringing in terms of my childhood. I grew up with my mom and stepdad. My parents were divorced when I was about 3. So, and then my stepdad, so I pretty much was raised from age 5 on with him. And he was a social worker. So my dad worked for the Department of Family Services. So it was really tough. My stepdad taking people's kids away. That was kind of his
Oh.
job, just a really stressful and challenging job. But when I was in high school, we adopted my brother and sister, a coworker. They were on a coworker's caseload. You couldn't adopt from your own caseload, but they had been removed from their house. Their parents both had substance abuse addictions and problems. And so we adopted them, and we all kind of look alike. We're all blonde and look like we're related, but yeah, I definitely learned a lot. My mom's a psychiatric nurse practitioner and my dad's a social worker. So I definitely grew up in a very psychosocial, heavy communication kind of family. And my mom is probably the most empathetic person I know. My mom we'll be like at a rest. I don't know. We'll just be like at Jersey Mike's getting a sandwich, and my mom will be best friends with the people there. Somehow my mom puts off this energy that people instantly want to open up to her.
Mm.
So I didn't appreciate I loved my mom growing up. I didn't appreciate that quality, kind of her professional quality, until I got older and got into, especially being in physical therapy, which has a very heavy therapy side to it.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing how skilled my mom is, I've definitely really grown to appreciate just how skilled she is in that area.
Wow. That's really cool. When you were really little, what was like the dominant theme in your family? What's like, give me a word that you think would describe your early childhood life, like say the first decade of life.
Hmm. Ooh, that is a great question. I would say it probably was something like empathy, I think, or yeah, my parents were both came at things in different ways, but I think they were both people who really tried to not judge other people and sort of come at people with kind of love and compassion. And so I think just because of both of their professions and who they were naturally, that's probably what I would say if I combine the two. And they had very different approaches, but I think overall, that's probably how I describe it, as sort of like an empathy or compassion for other people.
Mm, that's a great way to grow up.
Yeah, yeah, and I didn't appreciate it much at the time. I definitely didn't get along super well with my stepdad. My stepdad was very disciplined, and sort of that was the other side of him, kind of disciplined and authoritative in a way. And so there's friction there. I think like a lot of probably sons and dads. But as I've gotten older, I definitely have come to appreciate both of. My mom was easier for me to appreciate because of our relationship when I was little, but I've come to appreciate my stepdad's really, or his sort of outlook on people and life more as I've gotten older. And he was in a really stressful job. And I think once you have kids and you realize when you're stressed out, sometimes his stress would bleed over sometimes into when he'd come home. But that job was so stressful. I mean, he took people's kids away. He had to carry a
Mhm.
pistol with him. I mean, we had to remove our
Oh,
phone number from the phone book because people would call and threaten to kill him. I mean, it was
oh my God.
and so as a kid, you don't really understand all that. And so now,
Right.
as I've gotten older, I realize how stressful that job was and how much it must have been really difficult for him not to let that come out at home a little bit. So,
Absolutely. Did you have any sort of relationship with your biological father?
not really. He's kind of a narcissistic guy, and he was never really involved. The lady that he married later on was actually, she would mail birthday presents for me and my brother. I'm the oldest, and then the next in line. We were both from my mom's from that first marriage. And so his new wife would kind of mail things and try to kind of keep in touch, but he just really, I don't know. I don't know for what reason. My mom was really good about never really bad mouthing him, just kind of leaving it up to us to make our own decisions. But he's just never really been good at being involved. There have been a couple of times that I've gotten older in college and things that I went to try and visit him, but it's never really, it's a lot of like, oh, I'm going to try and stay in, it's just a lot of broken promises. And I think
Mm,
who knows why? Maybe it's just who he is, or it's hard now that I'm older. So it's kind of like
yeah.
a distant relative. I don't think about it too much.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing about that. I think people can relate to that. A lot of people have those types of relationships with the parent, and it's just good for people to be able to connect to that.
Sure. Yeah.
When you were a child, did you have a sense of what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I don't think I really had a sense of what I wanted to be specifically in terms of a career, but I did feel this sort of inner drive, probably from third grade on, of wanting to have an impact. I wanted to
Mm.
do something so weird. When I was in North Dakota, the bus ride home was 45 minutes. And I remember I would sit there and I used to do a lot of visualization as a kid, not knowing what it was, but I would just kind of daydream, and I would always daydream. It was sort of this like intuitive kind of gut feeling that I was going to do something important and have an impact somehow. And so that carried on through elementary school, junior high, high school. And I never really knew where it was going to go, but I just had this thing that was driving me that I didn't really know what it was going to be. I wasn't someone who was good about writing things down in a journal, trying to have like a vision or a mission. I just was following this kind of gut feeling. And I've always been kind of an achiever type person. Like, I don't know if you've ever taken the Enneagram, but, looking at kind of what motivates you, I've always been motivated by achievement. And I think for a long time, school was that for me, especially in college and going to physical therapy school. And I was always kind of looking to achieve. And And so I just was kind of following that inner feeling, that kind of gut feeling of almost like I would know I was in the right spot when it happened. And so I was just going to kind of keep moving forward until I hit that right thing.
Yeah. I feel like I am an empath as well. And I remember as a little girl feeling like I had some special powers. Did you ever feel that as a child?
I don't know. It's interesting to think about that. I don't know. I don't think I was totally in tune with my kind of empathetic side as a kid, like picking up. I see it now in my daughter, my oldest daughter. She will read the room and pick up on people's energies and
Mm-hmm.
go target the people who are left out. So
Mm,
she's really good at that. And I remember doing things like that as a kid, but I don't think I was really aware of it. That's interesting though. So you kind of felt like you had a sense of it as a kid. I've
I
got this
did.
sort of unique
Yeah.
sense.
I felt like I knew things that other people didn't know, or
Hmm.
I could feel things that other people didn't feel.
Yeah.
And I still feel that way.
That's
But
really,
I'm
yeah.
very high in open-mindedness on those
Mm.
personality tests, the various tests. I'm extremely high in open-mindedness, and I am very sensitive to energies, very, very.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I'm definitely more on the empathetic side, but I would say I probably naturally lean as, I don't want to say closed-minded, but skeptical. And I sometimes
Oh,
wonder if that shuts down, because I will when I'm talking with patients and people in pain, I think one of the things that's made me good at physical therapy is not necessarily the information I know, but being able to build rapport with people
yeah.
and sort of mirror them. And I think a lot of that is kind of that empathetic side playing out.
Yeah.
But I'm also a naturally skeptical science person. So I think I wonder as a young person, maybe I couldn't sense it like you could, because I just innately lean a little towards being a judging kind of skeptical personality. So, and
Oh.
that helps me in science, I think, but
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
an interesting play. It plays on it. It's interesting how that plays on itself with being empathetic, but also being kind of sciencey and skeptical.
Right, but it feels like a good balance for you and your profession.
Yeah, I think so. I think it helps keep me neutral. Like, I think it helps kind of, I mean, we're all biased, but I think it does help me. I think it helps me when we look at evidence-based practice in all of healthcare. It has kind of these three legs, and you're looking at the research and the evidence, you're looking at your
Mhm.
clinical experience, and you're looking at the patient's preferences. And you have those three. And I think
Mhm.
my particular personality, having a little bit of that empathetic side, being good at socializing and kind of building rapport with people, but also being kind of sciencey and kind of skeptical and judging. I think it helps me kind of merge those three components of evidence-based practice. And I
Mhm.
think that kind of plays out. I think that's what people like about my social media, is that it's not all just anecdotal and my experience. It's kind of got a combination of experience. What does the research say? And what have I seen in practice?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that comes across, I think, very relatable because a lot of people either are too far on like the woo-woo side, or they are afraid to give you all the information because they're afraid you might hurt yourself, or they're going to be somehow responsible for what if something happens as a result of what they tell you to do. So you are just very clear, and the way that you direct, especially like the illustrations in your book and the things you do on your social media, it's very clear and very relatable.
That's great to hear. That's amazing feedback. It is a tricky line to walk, because you want to, there is so much we can do on our own, but you want to also educate people on, well, sometimes there are symptoms that are more serious and you need to go
Yeah.
see someone. And we point out kind of these red flag type symptoms. That's what we'll look at in physical therapy. Certain symptoms that if you have them, especially clusters of them, then you really want to go get, just like things like cancer can manifest in the musculoskeletal system. And so you want to make sure if you have any of those that you just are safe. And so
Mhm.
even though we can manage most things on our own, it is tricky, especially on social media. You don't want people to look at social media posts and think this is all physical therapy is, and I'd never need to go see a practitioner, because I mean, that was part of the reason for doing the book, is you can be so much more nuanced in a book. 500-page book, you can cover way more detail about these topics and really help people navigate them. It gets you closer to like if you had a real in-person visit with a
Yeah.
physical therapist. So, but it's a tricky thing. I think about it all the time. People maybe not having the right information and doing an exercise maybe that's not appropriate and hurting themselves more, or they just go on trying to manage too long on their own and not listening to their body and really seeking out care when they need to.
Yeah, that's a great point. But the idea that you're not afraid to put the information out there, because most people really can help themselves with
Yes,
that
exactly.
information.
It's
I think that's
yeah,
great.
yeah. Over, I mean, probably if you look at like if you look at back pain, it's like greater than 95% of back pain is just general kind of musculoskeletal related back pain that you can treat on your own, So it's less than 1% are these really sinister conditions like a cancer in the spine or something. So it's a very small percentage, but you still want people to, I always tell people, you should, if you can rule out those really sinister red flag symptoms, then you're usually at an okay place where you can start trying to do some things on your own. And if, say, in 2 to 4 weeks you're the same or you've gotten worse, then that's a good time to go see someone. You just set kind of a time frame. I'm just going to try and manage this on my own for a little bit. And if it doesn't get better or it stays the same, then go see someone, because you really do get a lot of value from someone. When someone comes in to see me, I'm examining them, I'm testing their joints and muscles, and then I'm prescribing things that are very specific to their situation. So while there's tons of things that are great on social media, on YouTube, and in books, it's not the same as somebody testing you and personally prescribing things.
Yeah, so true. So when did you know that you were going to go into this field, this physical therapy?
I figured it out in college. I knew I was an athlete. I was a martial artist from kind of 6th grade through high school. I got a black belt in Taekwondo and was very interested in human performance and kind of exercise science. I was very interested in, like in high school, I could do the splits and I could do all these cool things. Like I was just very into the body. I would always read Muscle and Fitness. I was really into learning about how exercise could cause the muscles to hypertrophy and you could change your musculoskeletal system. I actually really didn't like high school. I wasn't going to go to college. I was going to go into the military right after high school. I think in high school, I just never really found a topic that I was interested in. So the only exposure I had to physical therapy was that in high school, I had knee surgery and I had to go to physical therapy for that. So that kind of got the wheels spinning a little bit about how can exercise be used to treat pain and injuries versus just for performance. And so then I decided to go to college and just test it out for a little bit. And I took anatomy and physiology and basically became obsessed, like I tend to do when I find something I'm into. I'm sort of obsessive. But I decided, I really like exercise physiology and exercise science. And then there's lots of different directions. Your daughter is studying kinesiology. There's a lot of directions you can take that. So you can be a personal trainer, you could teach Pilates or yoga, you go to physical therapy school, you could go to medical school, you could have an occupational therapist. Sometimes people go to nursing and PA. And so I think physical therapy, to me, I was so interested in the musculoskeletal system, and having had that experience in physical therapy, I think, and I realized it was also a stable career. There's physical therapy jobs in every town. You can move anywhere and there's a job. There's always a demand for it. So all those factors together kind of pointed me towards that profession. But I looked at a lot of things: medical school, optometry. I mean, I looked at podiatry. I kind of knew I wanted to be in something that had to do with the human body, but I ended up landing on physical therapy because it was just the musculoskeletal system was the thing I was most interested in.
Yeah. So you just mentioned a little bit about high school being a time when you didn't really know what was happening, or maybe was it more of a sense that you didn't fit? What was high school like for you?
I just wasn't interested. I just wasn't, for whatever reason. I think the way it was structured, I just didn't, there was nothing that was interesting to me. Once in a while, I'd have a class or a teacher I remember I had a physics teacher and a chemistry teacher that they were both great teachers, and that made me more excited about those classes. So, but overall, I think there wasn't anything that I really latched onto. And for that reason, I didn't try very hard. I came out with a less than not a great GPA. I mean, really, I could only get into the Montana State University system because I was a resident. And I just think there wasn't anything I was so interested in my sport in Taekwondo. I was spending all my time training and studying and there wasn't anything at school that really got me excited. It really wasn't. Now some high schools have anatomy and physiology. They didn't offer that when I was in high school. So once I discovered anatomy and physiology, then I was totally hooked. It just took finding the right topic. And I think it makes sense now looking back on it. I was literally reading health and fitness magazines. I was studying exercise physiology on my own because I loved it, but that wasn't offered in high school. So it wasn't until college when I could take that class. I was like, oh, this is literally the better version of what I was learning in muscle and fitness.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. What about socially? What was happening in your teen years?
I was involved, I think, because I had a really tight group in sports. I kind of had that team, and I was social in some respects, but I didn't go out. I think back at high school, and that's probably something I regret a little bit, is that I didn't do more of the social things that everyone, like going to parties and hangouts and things. I didn't do as much. My dad actually transitioned to being a police officer, so that deterred me from going to anything. I just knew I was going to really get in trouble if I got caught. So I didn't, but I definitely, even though I didn't realize it at that time, I look back and see some kind of introverted tendencies. I was more of a homebody. I wanted to be by myself a lot. Like I would I would expend a lot of energy when I'd go to martial arts and those practices and have to be social. And I think I really needed to recharge a lot by myself, but people weren't talking about introverted or extroverted that much. I was in high school I graduated from high school in year 2000. And I just think it wasn't a topic that people were as aware of. And so it's not until later now in life that I realize how much time I really need to kind of be alone and recharge. And I definitely also kind of hang out on the anxiety side of the spectrum. And I've had social anxiety my whole life. That didn't become really obvious until I was in graduate school. I was a little more stressed. I had kind of like what is like a panic attack, but only in social situations, a social anxiety attack. And so then I kind of, for a long time, had to really deal with this social anxiety kind of issue. But I think I remember as a kid, I always hated if people saying to me on my birthday, it made me really anxious. I did not like having people look at me. I didn't like being the center of attention. So I didn't have anxiety in other things, but I had it socially, especially with eye contact and things. And I just as a kid, nobody talked about social anxiety. Now you look at the stats, it's like 10 to 12% of the population struggles with it. So it's
yeah. And it can change at different times of your life. Like I'm definitely going through a period where I have more heightened anxiety, and I have actually had some panic attacks in my 50s, which I never had before.
Yeah.
And it's really an interesting thing to notice about yourself when you have that happening and to really figure out what's behind it. Because I had heard you say that you were an introvert, and then I was wondering, I put this together and I don't know what you think about it, but the idea that you are so expressive with the physical body, is that a way for you to express yourself and to understand expression through body language, literal body language, What do you think about that?
I think so. Yeah, I have always sort of had an identity in kind of movement and exercise. And some of that was that I was just interested in the particular endeavors I was in, and the achievement and that achiever side, like getting a black belt, like in martial arts, you're working towards something, and that always motivated me. But I also think movement was huge for me in terms of my overall sort of health and being able to curb some of that anxiety. So I think subconsciously, I found movement as this way I could express myself and sort of maintain homeostasis in my system.
Yeah.
And now, as I've become more aware of it, I know on days when I'm a little more wound up, if I just go exercise for an hour, I feel way better. I always think about, it's kind of like dogs, right? Like they always say you should exercise your dog is like the first thing. And we have a really anxious, hyper little dog. And if you exercise her, she's way calmer. And I think
so true.
I'm not that different. So
no, that is such a good point. And that's a great thing for people to note about themselves. Like just go and take a walk, do some exercise, and that helps to regulate the nervous system.
It's huge. I just saw a stat, another podcast yesterday talking about how much more powerful exercise is than a lot of the leading medications and other strategies for depression. And I think for both anxiety and depression, and obviously in physical therapy for the physical body and injuries and pain, exercise is probably one of the top things. It's like that and sleep. I mean, honestly, like those two are probably the two biggest things you can do in terms of healing. And because mental health is so wrapped up in pain and the physical body. And so a lot of the mental health my own mental health kind of journey has actually really helped me in how I treat patients, especially people who have more lingering or chronic pain symptoms, because it's all neural circuitry and
absolutely.
they're just circuits. And you're trying to figure out, when I had that really bad social anxiety, certain triggers would fire that circuit, social situations like eye contact. And so for a while, I avoided those. I'd wear sunglasses. I'd try to only have I would try not to be seated in social situations. That made me more anxious if I couldn't move around. And I would avoid those things, which actually made it worse. And it wasn't until I started kind of facing that problem and confronting it, which is what I tell people in physical therapy to do. When people have chronic pain, we get them to confront the things that trigger their pain in gradual doses. So I think I learned that through my social anxiety. It was sort of firsthand experience of what it's like to try and desensitize a neural circuit. And it's been so helpful now as I talk to people with pain and sensitive circuits just in the pain system, maybe not in the kind of anxiety type system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's such parallels between the things we feel in our minds and the things we feel in our bodies. There's one thing you said. I'm scrolling down in my notes here because I have it toward the end, but I'm going to bring it up now. Yeah. You talk about how healing goes through these phases. Mm-hmm. And I just saw this as such a metaphor. And you were talking about how it goes through the inflammation stage, which is where the damage comes in. So like a wound, and whether that's a physical wound or something you notice about yourself, like with the anxiety, mm-hmm. or a feeling in your body that isn't a pleasant sensation. And then it goes through maturation, mm-hmm. where once you confront the wound, you could rebuild it and figure out what it needs. And then the last phase of remodeling, which is building something new, making something new out of it. And it was like, I was like, mind blowing, because it was such a metaphor. What happens in the body and what happens in the mind, it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, there's so many parallels and similarities between those two things, this very kind of physical phases of healing, because though that research, those phases literally come from skin injuries. So they look at the skin and how it heals. So you're looking mm-hmm. at this very mm-hmm. physical thing in the body, but there's so much crossover, like you said, to things that we can't see, like our mind and our mental health, and you could really break it into those same types of phases.
You can. And I tell this story a lot about being afraid. You cannot be afraid to look at wounds. I had a situation with my daughter when she was young, and a bunch of kids were playing on the trampoline. And suddenly they all came running in the house and yelling that one of the little girls had cut herself. And I thought, okay, I'll go get the Band-Aids. I go into my closet, I get the Band-Aids and the Neosporin out. I bring it out. Well, I looked at this little girl's cut, and this was not going to be a Band-Aid kind of cut. It was an enormous gash that she had in her leg, that she had scraped her leg along a screw that was protruding from the trampoline. And it wasn't the kind of wound I could treat with a Band-Aid. If I had been afraid, and I'm definitely not, I don't like the sight of blood, but if I had been afraid to look at that wound, I wouldn't have known how to treat it. And that little girl would have had more trouble in her healing. So, I ended up piling everybody in the car, went right to the hospital for stitches, because it was not going to be a Band-Aid situation. But we're afraid to look at our wounds. And so whether it's a physical injury or an emotional injury, looking at the wound to know how to treat it is essential.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, there's a thing we talk about in pain rehabilitation, a model called the fear avoidance model. And it's kind of, I think, lines up with what you're talking about, that when you're afraid of something, for a lot of people, the natural response is to avoid it and just kind of deny it. And I did this for sure with that anxiety. I would avoid the triggers. I wouldn't confront it and look at it and try to figure it out. It was just easier to just avoid it. And that works, but it eventually becomes more problematic. And then you start to lose out on life because you're missing out on situations and avoiding them. And then the problem can actually become worse. The system can become more sensitive. And this is what we see with pain, that when you have an injury or pain, it's natural to have some fear about what's going on, especially with pains in the body, because, a skin gash like that, a lot of times, even though things on the surface can be scary, they're often less scary because you can see them, and our brain can immediately attribute a connection between the pain and an injury. Mm. they've shown in research that pains that are deeper, like bone pain or pains
Mm-hmm.
that are downside, are scarier to people because they can't see it. So you
Mm-hmm.
make up stories about what it could be. Oh, is this cancer? What is this? It's
Oh,
down in here. And people, we just as humans, I think part of our survival instincts is to make things, imagine things to be worse than they are, because it gets us to figure things out and keeps us alive. We didn't care something was hurting us deep. It could be cancer, and then we just die. So it's natural to have fear, but what you don't want to do is have that fear create this kind of avoidance pattern where you just look away and don't try to figure it out and
yeah.
actively confront it. And I think another thing you were talking about that's so important as an adult, especially caregivers and parents, when a kid gets injured, to not freak out is so important as much as you can, because especially in young kids, if parents do that, it actually can teach kids to be more sensitive. They
Mm-hmm.
look at this in different studies that kids who have parents that overreact to injuries and pain and the sight of blood can create a more sensitive nervous system in those kids as they develop later. And that could predispose them to something like a chronic pain condition.
Yep.
There's a lot of factors, but
Oh yeah.
it's
No, I
important. Yeah.
so true. It's like when your children are very little and they're off playing and you're sort of keeping a distance. Like I remember that time when they first started to play further away from me, and they're on the playground, you're watching them and they fall down and you wait. I used to just sort of wait and see what they would do.
Exactly.
If they started to cry, I would just kind of encourage them and be like, "You're okay, you're okay,"
Mm-hmm.
and let them go. But sometimes they would need to come back and have
Mm-hmm.
a hug.
Sure.
Sometimes they would need a Band-Aid, but it's really important to keep your composure, even though you might not feel like,
Exactly.
you might
No,
be panicking on the inside.
yep. No, that's such a great strategy. It's like give them a minute to figure it out. Well, there's so many of us want a helicopter parent now, and it's like you can just immediately run up, but it's good to give them a second. And then, yeah, if they need some validation and comforting, by all means do that. And then it's just like you try to, like you did, kind of stay positive, reassure them. And then you make sure that obviously there's nothing like a broken arm or something, like
Right.
something's really injured. But yeah, most of the
Right.
time the kid is just, you'll see them look at you to see how you're going to respond sometimes when they get hurt. So it's,
Absolutely. Yep, that's the way it goes. Oh
yep.
my gosh. Yes. So you talked about the idea of the nocebo effect and the idea that negative beliefs can play into the manifestation of pain or chronic conditions. And so I want to tie that to past experiences and like things that happen in your life. So not only can you mentioned in your book that doctors can have this effect, that if they say something to you that gives you a negative perception of your illness, it can create the nocebo effect.
Mhm.
We see this a lot with diagnoses, and especially like cancer. Someone says to you, "Oh, you have 6 months to live," and a lot of
Exactly.
times they will take that will be the time they live.
Mhm.
I feel like that's a manifestation of the nocebo effect. But the idea that like past experiences can inform your beliefs in the present and kind of fuel those types of illnesses or injury or pain. Have you seen a lot of this in your work where people's past experiences tie in to what's happening in their bodies?
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes it's hard to know where those beliefs come from, but I think for a lot of people, I'll see a lot of cases where it has been something that's been directly said to them by a healthcare practitioner, but a
Mm,
lot of it is stuff people carry, they've been carrying for a long time from earlier in life when they were kids. A lot of it is like family members like, oh, my dad's got a bad back, so I'm going to have a bad back. Like you hear those kind of things a lot where
yep,
people just attribute more to family history than they should. They just
yep,
immediately have already set the course for their situation. Like, oh, I'm just going to have this problem because my mom or dad had it, even when there might not be a real strong genetic link between those things. I think you see those kind of things, like how a parent reacts, like we were talking about, things that are told to them from a family member or what they see in that family member growing up. A lot of it is like really the people they grow up around and those persons believe. We call them thought viruses because they really
mm,
pass like that. So
they do.
what your parents or whoever you grew up with, whatever they sort of believed, it's really hard for that not to kind of pass into your system. So you sometimes have to really educate yourself and kind of change those beliefs. And it can be hard to do. Beliefs are hard to change, especially if you've been carrying them for a long time. Even if you're telling yourself you believe something different, sometimes at a gut sort of sympathetic nervous system level, if something happens, you might revert back to that old belief and let it kind of cause anxiety or stress. And I think culture is another one. Cultural factors really influence how people look at pain and injuries when they seek care, things like that. So, there's some cultures that just don't talk about pain, like it's considered a weakness. So they just don't talk about it, and they'll just kind of live with something maybe that they don't necessarily need to be living with. And so I think you see all kinds. There's people who want to talk about pain and injuries because of the attention they get from it. Maybe they saw someone in their life do that. And so it's such a complex thing. In the book, we talk about chapter 4 is all factors that influence pain. And there's so many, you try to, because you don't want people, unfortunately, a lot of times people think of physical pain as just some problem with their physical body. They haven't been taught all these other factors like your past traumas, your thoughts and beliefs, how well you're sleeping, what does your nutrition look like? There's so many factors, so many layers kind of the onion. And I think when you learn about those, then you can start to peel those back. I think this is what I end up doing with patients is that you try to kind of plant these seeds in a gentle way about these different factors. And what you'll find with people is that there might not be something that comes out instantly, but a month later or something at a future session, they'll be like, I just realized like this pain started back when I had this stressful thing happening in my life.
Yep.
And so then they start to connect the dots, especially in those people where pain lasts longer than it should. So that's what we look at in chronic pain is when pain is there after the tissues have healed. It's like they're still having this pain experience, but their tissues are healed. Everything looks fine on an image, on an MRI or something. And that's where you start having to look at these other factors and other things that influence the pain system outside of just the physical body.
Yeah, that's fascinating. In your book, you say that you can have an injury with pain, you can have an injury without pain, and you can have pain without an injury.
Exactly. Yep. This is something, chapter 6, we have this whole chapter on separating pain from injury. And it's so important for people to get this because people think of pain and injury as this one-to-one correlation. Like if I have pain, I have an injury in my body. Right. And we have so many studies now showing that people can have pain with no injury. You meet a lot of these people, right? Like you have someone who has back pain, they get an MRI and everything's clear. And then they're kind of bummed out because there's nothing to blame it on.
Right.
So it's kind of
then what do they do? How do they that's when I feel like you have to get to the root of something in the mind and spirit. Like that's related elsewhere.
Well, and you can have physical pain in your body, but not have an injury at all that can be seen. So inflammation is like that. You can't really see inflammation on an image. And so a lot of times it's trying to help people understand that like pain is this thing that comes from your nervous system, but it can happen even when there's no damage to your body. They have studies like this now where they'll take people and they will make them believe that they're going to cause an injury. And the person their brain will create pain, even though there really was no injury. One of the most famous ones, they take a metal rod and they touch it to the back of people's hands, but the rod's just air at room temperature. But in some people, they'll show a red light before they touch them. And some people, they'll show a blue light. And then they'll ask them, how painful was that? And the people who see a red light always say it's more painful because they attribute red to hot and think it's going to burn them. And the other thing too is in that same study, sometimes they'll let the person look at the rod, touch their hand, and sometimes they will block their vision. The people who see it touch their skin report more pain as well. So there's all these facts, you can make people believe that something dangerous is going to happen to their body. And in those studies, they've basically shown that pain is this thing that your brain creates to try and protect you and keep you alive. And you can make people create it even when there is no damage to their body.
That's huge. I think that takes the relief. It actually is a bit of a relief, I think, for like thinking about it that way, that just because you have pain does not mean that you have an injury necessarily. Like if you can't find an immediate cause to it.
I think it's a huge thing in rehab because you want to get people in most cases, we're trying to help people understand that even though you might feel pain, the likelihood of damage to your body or causing more injury is really low. I just was talking with someone yesterday about this, that she feels pain when she does certain things, but we want to have a little bit of pain in her particular situation, those exercises, just a little bit, because it helps to kind of challenge that pain system. And that's how you make it less sensitive through this graded exposure kind of thing. But prior to coming in, she thought anytime she had pain, it meant that she was damaging or injuring something more. And so there are all kinds of cases. Like there are people who clearly have injuries. Like if you sprain your ankle and tear the ligaments in your ankle, well, that is a situation where we'll usually tell people don't push into pain because we want to let those tissues heal and gradually regain mobility and strength. So every situation is different. There are some people who clearly had, like if you had a trauma, like a very clear injury, and then you have pain, there probably is a good connection between those, and you need to be careful of not pushing into pain. But if you didn't have an injury, there was no obvious injury, and you just have pain, well, then that's probably more likely a situation where you are having pain, but there's probably not an injury. If you were to go on an MRI or an X-ray, there wouldn't be something there. But it
Yeah.
still is real pain. It's not saying that it's made up. It's just
Right.
something we can't see on an X-ray MRI. It's like your nervous system is kind of wound up and it's telling
Yeah.
you to kind of pay more attention to an area, but it doesn't mean that something's really damaged.
Yeah. Do you talk with people about calming and soothing the nervous system as you do the physical rehab with them?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of it is that it depends on the person, because some people do have a very straightforward mechanical kind of pain, injury kind of pain thing going on. And I talk about it less in those situations. It still can be important, but some people you really, and I think that's where sometimes the empathetic kind of just listening part comes in, because
Mm.
some people you really can sense their fear and worry about it and
Yeah.
their symptoms. You start to see where their symptoms don't match up with what
Mm.
happened to their body. Like they will report nothing serious happening to their body, no injury, but then they have this kind of exaggerated pain response that doesn't match up, and they become
Mm.
sort of hyper vigilant. Sometimes you get people who write
Mhm.
down every
Mhm.
symptom all day and they are so hyper focused on it. And you're trying, and then in those cases, you really are trying to talk to them about the nervous system and the nervous system becoming more sensitive, and thinking about ways to kind of those individuals I'm in spending more time talking about breathing and like
Yeah.
meditation and
Yeah.
sleep, and just trying to try to get the whole system to kind of wind down.
Yeah, like a health anxiety really can come into play. There's a term for this, I can't think of it, but when you're hyper vigilant about your symptoms and you can
Yeah.
feel everything. And then
Yeah.
just it's really scary when you have that condition, because I actually have experienced this myself, where
Mhm.
you'll feel something and then every single little thing you feel in your body, you fear it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it almost creates this positive feedback
Yep.
loop where then you get anxious because of it, and then
Yep. As
yeah.
exactly.
And I think
And
people who are more sensitive, who are empathetic and
yeah.
sensitive, I see more of this in because I think they're just more sensitive to stimuli. And I often think if
Mhm.
we could measure this better, that I think that people who are really sensitive in terms of their pain system, I often find they're sensitive in other areas. Like they're sensitive to auditory stimuli, they might be sensitive to touch, they're sensitive to other people's energy. And while those things often are really valuable, they can be negative sometimes, in that I think those individuals sometimes are more likely to have pain, and to have pain that lasts longer, maybe be predisposed to kind of persistent or chronic pain states. And so they've got to be maybe a little more focused on implementing those kind of parasympathetic, calm my system down
Mhm.
things, because I'm being influenced by stimuli so much. I know for me, I have a very low threshold for auditory stimuli. That kind of stimuli will really ramp my nervous system up. I'll get agitated, I'll tense up. Areas where I have pain will be more obvious. So I've learned over time that if I am in a heavy, like if there's a lot of auditory stimulation, sometimes I just need to separate myself from that and have some time to just let my system kind of calm down again.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel that way too. I have the exact same thing. And visual stimulation too.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's a combination of auditory and visual, I will have to go away from those
Mm-hmm.
situations. And I think once you're more in tune with your body and you can listen to what it's telling you, like how do you train people or teach people to be in touch with their central nervous system to know what to do in those situations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I probably could be better at kind of giving people cues to be, because I think a lot of times I'm educating people on these things and encouraging them to try and kind of be aware of. Okay, a lot of times I'm talking about pain and having people pay attention to when their pain sort of ramps up. But
Mhm.
I think this is an area I probably could be better at having specific cues for people to think about, like, oh, is your breathing, are you taking shorter breaths? Like, are you taking quicker breaths? Are you feeling more tense in your muscles? Are you getting agitated? I think those are all kind of common symptoms when people start going over into kind of that sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. They'll
Mm-hmm.
start to get kind of wound up, like ready for action. And
Yeah.
maybe
Well,
that's a way, like, are you noticing your body preparing for action? If you're noticing
mhm,
that happening in a situation where it doesn't need a lot of action,
right.
then maybe that's a time to figure out implementing one of these strategies. I know for me, a lot of times just I have like a YouTube video that's a meditation, like a 20-minute meditation
Mm-hmm.
that I just save it and I just listen to that. I go lay down and close
Yep.
my eyes and just that really helps. It's amazing when I come out of that, how much different I feel. I focus on my breathing. I'll do the box breathing all the times and
Oh,
think
yeah.
about focus
Yep.
on my breathing. Or a lot of times for me, it's listening to things in my environment. Cause I think sometimes when you get that your sympathetic nervous system starts to kick in, you become less aware of what's happening kind of around you. You get that kind of hyper focused type of feeling. Everything tenses up. And I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just listening, what are all the sounds that I can hear around me right now? You kind of get out of your own head and then the system starts
Mm-hmm.
to calm down again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a good cue. I think I need to
Oh,
think more
yeah.
about telling people those things. It's another level I'm realizing I could be better at helping
Yeah.
people identify those other kind of bodily cues.
Right. I would love to see a study on that, on people who are highly sensitive and how pain manifests or how they're able to manage it. And to think about whether it's heightened in those people is a really interesting thing. So I do believe well, I don't know if pain is heightened, but definitely sensations in my body. And I know, like for me, when my central nervous system is too active,
Hmm.
I actually get other physical symptoms like a warm sensation,
Mhm.
or I'll get tingling sensation and things like that. And then sometimes even you'll get like a headache, or you'll get, a tense sensation in your throat or your neck or your jaw. Like
Mhm.
those are all signs for me that I need to leave. And also, if you're asked to do something, like if you're invited to do something and you start to feel tense right away about the idea of doing it, it's a good idea not to put yourself in that situation. Like those are all signals. Like,
Exactly. And they're such subtle little things that we can ignore them. It's not until you
yep.
really start to know yourself. And I think that's probably why the
Yes.
meditation and mindfulness practices have been so helpful to people because I think when you get in the habit of doing that regularly, it's such a good way for becoming in tune with your thoughts and what's happening in your body.
Yep.
And if we all had that as the foundation, I think we would be much more aware. Like you say, someone asks you to go somewhere or something happens in life, you'd start to notice those subtle little cues like, oh, this is happening in my body right now.
Mm-hmm.
Why is
Mm-hmm.
that happening? And how does that tie to my thoughts? Like, what am I, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the important things about getting to know yourself is thinking about what's happened in your life and like in your past experiences. And like the way that you have in your life, the tendency to want it to be alone, the awareness of the awareness from your parents about communication and sort of self inquiry, I guess, in your family, where you were in that situation where that was always something that was a part of your life. And so like when you are able to go back into your past experiences and think about how those things give you data about what's happening now in your life, you can get in better tune with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like it happens for me, anyways. It almost like it happened subconsciously
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's not now when I sit and think about how I developed and what my environment was like, I can recognize, I can kind of logically put together, oh, I can see how these factors help me become who I am and have this ability to communicate the way I do and be aware, oh,
Hmm.
maybe a little more aware than the average person of what's going on in my body and how I'm feeling and thinking. You just take those things for granted. I think I took them for granted the way I grew up. And now it's been so fun to do the book and be on podcasts. It's made me think about all this stuff,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I used to, and I've thought about it over the years, especially in PT as I've done more therapy and physical therapy and just talked
Hmm.
with people who have more complex pain symptoms. It's made me reflect on what I gained from my upbringing. I mean,
Hmm.
for sure that there was challenges and negative things, but I think I can see so many positives in kind of the perspectives my parents had and how that shaped me.
Hmm.
Even the things that were
Definitely.
challenging and a struggle, right? Like those things make you more resilient and Yeah, but it is interesting. They weren't things that I thought about as a kid. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't real aware or in tune.
Right.
And I still think I have a long ways to go in terms of my emotions. And I remember I saw a counselor years ago and she told me I was a white belt in terms of my emotions. So
Wow.
that was years ago. So hopefully I'm like a purple belt now or something. But
That's funny. Can you give us an example of something from your life that was a challenge or a negative situation and how you learned from it?
yeah. Well, I think probably the most obvious would be, let me see, like as I think about, I think probably the challenges were things that created a lot of stress. And so,
Mm.
I had one of my brothers died when he was 18 and I was 24, and
Oh.
he was my half brother. And so I think that was, you think about my family, right? There was me and my next brother, I'm the oldest, were the two from my mom's first marriage. And then my half brother was my stepdad's only kid because the two younger were adopted.
Mm.
So going through that stress, my brother died traumatically and kind of suddenly fell off a hotel balcony, and don't think it was a suicide, but he was on LSD and it was just
Mm.
partying with people. And that was horrible for my family. I mean, my parents losing a kid. And I think it was 3 weeks before I got married. So it was at this really stressful time, anyways. And
Mm.
I look back on stuff like that and I think that that requires, up to that point, I hadn't had really stressful stuff. I mean, life was
Mm.
pretty easy as a kid. I look at my kids now, they've gone through a pandemic. We've had wildfires here in California, mudslides. Like, I think my kids think there's a natural disaster every other year. So
Oh
they've
no.
been through a lot more early on. My childhood as a kid, I don't remember a whole lot of negative stuff, but my brother dying was kind of the first really big stressful challenge.
Mm.
And I think, and I've had other things since then, like my wife's dad committed suicide and my dad died of brain cancer. And I think you go through these things and you have to work at being, I'm naturally a pretty positive person, but you can see how that stuff, those kind of stressors can make you have this more negative viewpoint and become cynical. And you see older people, right? Like you see those really joyful kind of older grandparents, and then you see the really cynical grumpy grandparents, and you can
Mhm.
see how you could go either direction. And I think you have to make kind of a conscious decision to, you have to be intentional about how you combat stress.
Mhm.
And I think it's easy stress, it's pretty easy to handle stress when you're younger and maybe you don't have a lot of stress, right? Like it's just, you don't have to. But I think as you get older, for me, as I've encountered more of these things, I've definitely had to be more disciplined I've been so disciplined my whole life about my physical body.
Yeah.
And I really had to think more about being disciplined with my mind. And I think
Mm.
that to me is probably ties into so much of what I end up doing in physical therapy, because people come to physical therapy only thinking that this is going to be about my physical body and I need to be disciplined and do these exercises for my physical body. But
Yeah.
we look at all pain and injuries from this biopsychosocial model. That's how most healthcare is approached now. So there's the bio part of the biopsychosocial, which is your biological body and your physical tissues, which is a third of it. It's important, but you have to look at the psychosocial as well. And I think we're in a day and age where you look at podcasts and what big groups are, these big podcasts are talking about. Luckily, there is a lot of focus on mental health. And I think that is people are becoming more aware of not just training their physical body, but also training their mind and their spirit. And I think those challenges taught me that stuff firsthand. And luckily, I had a great social network. I had my mom, I had friends. And I think that is another huge thing. Like your social connectedness. We all learned that during COVID, how
Yeah.
detrimental it is to lose that. But right, that's one of the number one predictors of mortality, is how, if you're lonely or not. So, and we
Yeah.
definitely see that in the pain system. They find that people who have chronic pain laugh less. They're often
Mm.
more disconnected socially. They pull away from social situations. And so a lot of sometimes a lot of intervention is just to get them reconnected socially and get them laughing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that ties back to this idea of kind of stress management, meditation, being connected and being in a positive social network. But I think that is a thing I end up trying to, everyone that comes to physical therapy, trying to bring up some of these other kind of whole person health related topics, sleep, stress management, the social piece, your thoughts and beliefs. Because if you only, even the people who have straightforward injuries, if you don't ever discuss that stuff, you're not arming them to, I think,
fix it. It's not going to be, it won't be totally fixed.
Exactly. You're not going to totally fix that thing, and you're not going to be ready for something more challenging that might come later.
Yeah. Do you think that healing others helped you heal some of that trauma in your own life?
Yeah, I think people's stories, because I end up, now that I'm not in an insurance model, some of my initial evaluations will go 2 hours. So I spend a lot of time trying to let people talk, explain their story. And I think hearing people's stories and seeing how others have navigated stressful situations and trauma and how they've come out on the other end. Yeah, I think it definitely has helped, because I'm learning things all the time. Somebody thinks they're in here just to learn from me, and we're always learning from each other. Like you can't help it. You're just seeing how other people do things. And sometimes I'll get a light bulb and be like, oh, I should think about that. Like I should try and do that. Like they've been doing this thing. Maybe I should think about doing that thing. And so, yeah, I think I haven't thought about it until you asked that question. I haven't thought about it. There hasn't been a moment where I was like, oh, that obviously helped me deal with these things, but I guarantee it has. I don't think it'd be hard for it not to, because I'm talking with people about often traumatic things.
Yeah.
And they might be, there are oftentimes different kind of traumas, but you're still having to deal with trauma.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think it has.
Yeah, I would say it has. What about people's self-talk? Do you find people are coming in and beating themselves up or talking about their injuries in a negative way or their pain in a negative way? And how do you help them shift their self-talk to be more positive and loving towards their bodies?
Yeah, I think people do have a lot of negative self-talk. I think some of it's almost like people being worried about what their future looks like because of an injury or pain, and then kind of making up stories about I'll never get back to what I used to do, or I'll never be able to do this thing again. I think that's the kind of negative self-talk I probably encounter most, is that tendency for humans, I think all of us, to kind of imagine worst case scenarios and then tell ourselves that story. And so I think probably one of the most important things all people treating mental or physical pain do is to reassure people. I think to kind of be positive and reassure people. In the pain kind of rehab world, so much of it is me just like really telling people most things just get better, even if you didn't seek care. Most pain conditions just go away on their own. Like we have lots of studies where they just track things and do no intervention. And after a certain number of months, it usually goes away. So a lot of practitioners will take credit for that and say, oh, it's getting better because I'm doing this thing, but it could just be the natural history. And so I think that's reassuring to people, and the truth is most people can get back to most of what they were doing. Sometimes there's really severe injuries or surgeries where there might be some permanent kind of modification, but I'm very apprehensive about telling people you can never do this again, because we've all heard all the stories of someone saying, my doctor said I'd never be able to run again, and now I'm running marathons. Somebody just said this in a comment in one of my posts yesterday.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the nocebo, how powerful language is. Those things can really harm people. I was on with another podcaster who'd been told by his doctor that his back looked like that of a 70-year-old, and he'd always be kind of limited by it. And he held on to this belief for years until he started doing his own health research and kind of figured out that really probably wasn't accurate. And so I think people need to, I think a lot of what I'm doing when people have that negative self-talk is really just kind of reassuring them about the body's really natural ability to heal, and that most of these things get better. And that, I think, a lot of times helps at least cut down on some of the negative self-talk. And then also just helping people kind of become aware of it. I mean, this is something I've just started looking at, because I started to get into a tendency lately during COVID, I think, where when I wasn't out as much, I was always at the house working. I wasn't seeing
Mm-hmm.
people that often. And then I was in my head so much, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
naturally in my head a lot anyways. It started to become detrimental. I needed to be around other people and have sounding boards and people giving me feedback, because I would just kind of drive myself crazy
Yeah.
spinning in my thoughts. And I started to develop some kind of negative self-talk. I'd even verbalize it sometimes. I'd say it to Kirsten or something like, oh, like if I didn't sleep well, I would talk about it. Or like, I just don't like, I didn't sleep well. I would just verbalize these negative things, and then that would reinforce that
Yeah.
feeling. And so I have recently become, which is an unusual thing for me because I just didn't do that up until just in the last couple of years that started happening. So I've had to more recently start really thinking before I talk and recognizing when there is some negative thought. And sometimes those negative thoughts are going to happen, but for sure, I try not to verbalize them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because when we have a condition, we tend to get up in the morning and think, okay, what's happening in my body? And then you'll say to your partner or someone in your household, oh, I didn't sleep well, or I'm really feeling my arm is killing me this morning, or whatever it is. And maybe it's a good idea to just hold off and try to work through it a bit before you verbalize those
Mm-hmm.
negative things, because like you said, things do resolve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not really solving anything by saying
Right.
that,
No, you're not.
So I think just blunt, like just try not to verbalize it, and then just, yeah, plan to have a plan. Like, I'm going to try and implement this. I'm going to do some of those movements or exercises that I
Mm-hmm.
learned in PT, or I'm going to try to take a nap today. I just have a plan. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah. Have a
so,
plan.
mm-hmm,
And also, I heard Mel Robbins say this, and I thought it was brilliant. She said, when you're doing that negative self-talk thing, to say to yourself, what if it works out? What if it
mm-hmm,
all works out? And
yep,
then your brain starts to naturally think about what that looks like when it works out well.
exactly.
And that's
I
a really
think
good place to go.
for sure I've gotten into that more recently because I was telling you, as a kid, I really was good about daydreaming and visualizing.
Yeah.
And at that kind of flow state, I recognize I was kind of in a flow state when that would happen.
Yep.
I now implement times. I'm like, there will be times where I just don't have as many opportunities to do that. I think life is busy. I have kids. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
but I do go for walks. And I find a lot of times if I go for
Mm-hmm.
walks and put in music, I can get myself into that visualization kind of flow state. And it really
Mm-hmm.
is like a meditation session for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think I've heard a lot of more people talking about this, what you were saying, just that idea of kind of visualizing things going well. Like,
Yes.
imagine your future self and imagine it going well. And it really
Yep.
does change how you feel.
It does. It does. It can change the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then, yeah, exactly. You change how you feel. And then you're more likely to have that outcome happen
That's right.
because you've totally changed your outlook and perspective on it. And,
Yeah.
and maybe who knows what else happens in the universe. It seems to help those things manifest when you are
It definitely
imagining the positive outcome.
It definitely does. And I can't go any further without asking you about the time that you tried out for Cirque du Soleil. Shift gears a little bit,
Oh
because
my goodness.
I have to hear this story, because
Yeah.
we're coming up to time, and I just want to get that story before we
That is a funny
wrap up.
story. That was an adventure, let me tell you. Being a martial artist and gymnast, I've always been loved Cirque du Soleil. I'd been to lots of shows and the Vegas shows, and there's a show in Vegas called Ka that's martial arts focused. It has 8 stages, and they rotate and they do these different fight scenes. And so there are people who come just to check out the stages, like stage kind of nerds, because the stages are so impressive. But I was looking at the martial arts side of it, and I don't know how I ever found out, but I think one day I was like, I wonder how you become a performer for Cirque du Soleil. And I just decided, I ended up finding this link for tryouts, and they have it broken up by specialty type. And as a martial artist and gymnast, I was on the day of eclectic talents. So I had to go to Vegas to this gymnastics school for this one day of tryouts. And I was so exhausted. We had actually been in Paris and flew back the night before. So I was jet lagged, drove to Vegas, and got up the next morning, went to this gymnastics school. And you walk in, they give you a number, and then they just call you randomly, and you have to have a 2-minute routine prepared. And so everybody sits down around the mat, and it's the day of eclectic talent. So the world champion sumo wrestler was there. There was a troupe from Africa. There was the most interesting, amazing athletes you could imagine, all martial arts gymnastics backgrounds.
Wow.
Former Olympic gymnasts, like all kinds of things. And I was drawn first
Oh,
to go. So everyone sits down and it was this most anxiety. I was so nervous. And so I just do this 2-minute routine. I had this, luckily in martial arts, in Taekwondo and things, you do all these kind of katas, like these forms where you do moves in sequence. And I had been on a demonstration team where we traveled around and performed doing gymnastics and martial arts combined. So I kind of had a background in how to choreograph stuff. So at least I had that, but it still was nerve wracking. So there was a lot of really high level people there. And it was great. You basically have the morning time where you do your physical routine. And then if you pass, you go to the afternoon, which is the acting portion of, which I didn't make it through after I did, but it was so great because I had no acting training and I would have totally been panicked in that. And I remember I asked them, I said, why didn't I go through? And they just said, your profile's atypical. And I didn't really know what that meant. And they were kind of apprehensive to say, but they're like, well, most of our martial artists are Asian. And so I just didn't.
oh,
I thought it was just all makeup, but I also had the wrong style. The martial artists that they normally have are these more flowing kind of passive styles. And I came from a very hard Taekwondo is a different kind of style. It's not really fit with their shows. But so then a year later, I became a physical therapist for them. So I went back. I was already a PT when I tried out to be a performer. I think I was 25 or something like that. I'd just been out of PT school probably for a year, something like that. And then I went back the next year and got a job as a PT for them, which was amazing. I went to Vegas for a while and then to Montreal and worked on the performers. And the show I was on had a lot of contortionists and dancers from Juilliard and Olympic gymnasts. And it was a really neat experience. That organization is impressive. And the people who perform in it are really impressive athletes. And those shows are kind of retirement for them. A lot of them are coming out of professional sports and things. And Cirque is kind of it was unbelievable. That was a really amazing experience.
That sounds like an adventure.
Totally.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. I love that so much.
It's so fun to think back about. It would have been amazing to have gotten in and been a performer for a little while, but it was still fun to just, you feel like proud of those things that are scary that you take on and you make it through.
What a cool thing to do. I love it. I want to ask you about you say that you think we're headed towards a self-led model of medicine. Can you just talk a little bit about what that means? Because I feel the same way. I think we're headed towards that. And just to explain a little, as I have been through a little bit of a chronic condition myself over the past year, and trying to figure that out has been a challenge. And trying to find the right doctors and getting appointments and trying to do research into something that nobody can seem to figure out has been a challenge. And so I feel like we are headed towards a self-led model because the medical model is sort of set up it's like a prescription model. Like you have this symptom and this is what we do. And if you don't fit into that, it's very difficult to navigate. So
it's incredibly hard to navigate it, especially if you don't have any medical background. I think we are really you have to be an advocate for yourself and you have to do research and you have to keep looking it's so hard. If you don't have a medical background, it's really challenging because you've got to know what information to trust because there's a lot of weird stuff out there that has no evidence around it. So I think people have to, which it may work in some situations, but you hear horrible situations where people have like cancer and they go and do these alternative medicine practices and die because they didn't seek out evidence-based care. So I think it's a tricky process. You really have to do your research. You have to look at the research. Everybody can go on PubMed and look at research. You can kind of try to find out what are things that are being talked about, but also realize that some things that might work maybe haven't been studied that much. So you also have to realize the research has its limitations, but you try to do your best to see what the evidence says and then seek out practitioners who you believe are doing things that have some level of evidence and efficacy to them. Because if you go to just the regular doctor, I went the other day, I just thought I haven't been established with a primary doctor in quite a while and I needed to get blood work. I just want to do blood work. And I went in there and I knew more about most of the things that were going on with me than the primary doctor. And that's fine. The things I was talking about were more in my field anyways. So I just knew more about it, but it was it made me realize exactly what you're talking about, that it felt like a waste of money. It was really expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't feel like I really got anything out of it. And then I went and signed up for a company. Now there's all these amazing companies online where you that do blood work. Like I
Yeah.
signed up with this company called Merrick Health. They're awesome. I went to a lab here in town. I first had a consultation with them. I told them what health things I wanted to look at. Like I was noticing my energy was kind of low over the last couple of years. So I wanted to check my testosterone, all these hormones. I just wanted to look at it.
Yeah.
And that consultation, they then tailor your blood work to what your goals are and what symptoms you're having. If you just go to the regular doctor, they just order like a basic blood panel. It doesn't look at any of these other things. It just
Right.
getting what you need is really challenging in the standard medical model. Doctors don't have time for you. They're super rushed. They don't have time to listen. And like you said, if you don't have the perfect symptom or problem that fits their what they do all day, you're not going to
Yeah.
get what you need, or you're not going to get the
Right.
all of what you need. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you really have to, then, and the nice thing is, I think in terms of this kind of self-led model, if you can do your research and kind of educate yourself and get an idea, a theory for what you think you need, with how connected the world is with internet and online, all these telehealth and telemedicine and lab services like I did, you can you can talk to people so quickly and easily that I think if you're willing to do the work, it might take a little bit of time. The body and our physiology is way more, we don't understand hardly any of it.
That's right. We don't.
Like I see this all the time now with people with these different gut disorders.
Yeah.
People have these different kind of intestinal GI system problems. And I think I've had a few friends recently going through this. They have a really hard time finding the doctors with the right specialty to figure out what's going on with them.
Yeah, it's true. And the doctors are so busy, like to no fault of their own. They're so busy because the system is so overburdened. They don't have time to look at their latest research. I've done research on things that I know are recent studies from 2020 and on up about various things I'm curious about. And I know that my doctors haven't read these studies. Like I'll ask them about it and they're not familiar with these things.
And I think that's why a lot of these doctors have switched to concierge medicine, and why a lot of people have. You're paying out of pocket, but people are realizing that your health is probably your number one priority. If you die, you don't get to do anything else on this planet. So,
absolutely,
I think a concierge doctor, like a lot of the physical therapists like myself who've switched out of insurance, it gives you the time. You can spend the time with people to really look through all their data, talk about their history, like really because these doctors are so highly specialized, but I think ultimately it just boils down to they don't have time to actually sit and talk with you and figure out what's going on. If they really had that time, then you would be able to figure things out with that person. But it's just the way the system is set up, that's often just not realistic. And so a lot of times it's about seeking out. I think a lot of times it is seeking out the person who has the specialty in the area where you think your problem is, and then that person who actually has a practice model that allows them to spend time with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thinks out of the box, is willing to look at you as a whole system rather than just your symptoms individually.
That's a huge
really
point.
Important.
Yes, looking at that whole person and thinking about, because unfortunately, like, some doctors are really good about that. Some doctors don't think about anything else like sleep or nutrition or stress. It's just that system. And so, that is a great point. You want to find that person who's thinking about kind of all of your physiology, because it's all intertwined.
It is. It's all connected. So interesting. Oh my gosh. So, Tom, can you just tell us what you think are the biggest lessons that you've learned in your life?
That's a good question.
Well, this is the Blessings podcast.
Yes.
So we have to talk about the lessons and the blessings of your life.
I love it. I love the theme. I think the biggest lesson for me, one of the biggest lessons for me that's been on my radar probably more recently as I've encountered more challenges and gotten older, is just being grateful for things that, because we can all sit and think quickly about things we're grateful for, but I think actually having that practice of writing things down daily that I'm grateful for. And I think that is the antidote to a lot of the stress and negativity in life. And sometimes I think our thoughts are often the driver of a lot of these things that are going wrong in our lives or make us feel bad. And so I think for a lot of people I see that come in here, we were talking about negative self-talk. We were talking about placebo and nocebo and how our thoughts and beliefs can influence us. I sometimes think if people start with strategies that help them get out of negative thought patterns, that sometimes may be the best starting point for combating most health related issues. And I think gratitude is maybe one of the biggest. Just trying to think about, and I heard someone talk about this the other day. Sometimes it's hard to be positive when bad things are happening, but you can try to limit the amount of time you spend thinking and talking about the negative things. Sometimes that's easier to do. If something hard is happening, you might be going through something really challenging and be like, how can I be positive in a time like this? But you can try to be less negative.
Yes.
And at any time in life, I think we can still think about small things that happen that we can be grateful for. And I just really think that's one of the major lessons I've learned in life, is just how much our thoughts can drive how we feel and behave. And sometimes that is the best starting point, is first get in tune with your thoughts, maybe spend time in meditation and being quiet with yourself and figuring out, what are my thoughts? What kind of thoughts are going through this head? Because when you actually sit in your quiet, it's really hard to stop having thoughts and let them flow through you. You realize how many thoughts are constantly popping up in your brain. And then they take you certain directions and you start worrying about that thing. And so just first try to become aware of how many thoughts are appearing and what those thoughts are and what they do to your body. And then after that, try to implement strategies that push back against that and sway you more in the positive, kind of grateful direction.
Yeah. I do think that's paramount.
I mean, and then of course there's all kinds of that's the thought stuff. I think, there's other lessons that are maybe more tangible, especially as they relate to what I do, but just the importance of daily movement and exercise we were talking about before, even if it's just walking. I bought this little cheap watch that tracks steps just because I realized I wasn't walking a lot. I became more sedentary during COVID. So just set goals, just try to get 8 to 10,000 steps a day. Sometimes it doesn't have to be these complicated physical therapy exercises. Or going to the gym and having a perfect program. I could just be walking. And I think just introducing movement, find something you enjoy. I mean, honestly, that's if you like swimming, do that. If you like some class at the gym, do that. Just try to move throughout the day. We're so sedentary. We spend so much time indoors now. I just think we're from an evolutionary standpoint, that's not how we were designed. And so I think those kind of tangible things, make sure you get enough sleep. Those are the things. And then find ways to manage stress. Those are probably the big three that if people thought more intentionally about those, I'd see a lot less patients. If they moved a little more, weren't so static during the day. A lot of people are just sitting and standing in place. If they moved more, really were disciplined about getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep, and regularly implemented strategies to reduce stress.
Yeah.
There'd be way less people in physical therapy.
Yeah, there'd be way less people in every doctor's office.
So true.
Oh my gosh. So what about your blessings? What are your things that you're the most grateful for?
I am the most grateful for, so much of it is what's going on in my life right now, my family. My wife's a PT and is amazing. And my girls I'm at this sweet spot in life. They're 12 and 9 and just the sweetest little people. I grew up mostly with my brothers just beating on each other and breaking things. So girl energy is amazing. My mom is amazing. I have that person just as a check-in, she's just amazing for bouncing. I'm super grateful for family. And then I'm just grateful I every night think about this platform, the platforms I have right now, the Rehab Science platform. It's kind of what I always dreamed about having. I never felt fulfilled. I realized when I would see people one-on-one in physical therapy or even teaching at a college, there was an impact there, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. And I think now being able to reach so many people, there's so much talk about how negative social media is, but there's so much positive too, if you can find the right things. And I think I see that every day, just how powerful putting out posts about different pain issues and injuries and giving people a few exercises. And I've had the opportunity to interact with so many people around the world, a lot of times in countries where they don't have access to care or it's too expensive, and they get better. They have a phone and they can do exercises. And I think that is something I'm so grateful for. It just to have this, be able to have, I feel so grateful to have work because I wasn't super happy with physical therapy in the traditional setting of just seeing people one-on-one. I knew I liked the information, but it just wasn't the exact right outlet. And so I think now I feel really grateful that it feels really meaningful. I think because I'm teaching, at the end of the day, I think I'm wired to be an educator. That's what I enjoy. And I have this opportunity now to educate and help people on a larger scale. So it's all these factors coming together that I'd always kind of dreamed about having. And as an introvert, it's perfect because I'm doing it. I don't have to put out as much energy as I do in one-on-one kind of conversations, teaching people about the same topics or teaching in a classroom. And so the book is an extension of that. I am really grateful for, those are probably the big things, family and just what's going on with the kind of work side of my life right now.
Yeah, I love it. Is it surreal? How many followers do you have on Instagram? You're like over a million.
Yeah, over a million. It's almost to 1.1.
Yeah, it's so crazy.
It's crazy. There's so many factors. I was one of the first PTs on Instagram and I was just consistent. It's like people say, so many things that grow and become successful in life are just showing up. You have to keep showing up. Yeah. And so that's all I did with that. I didn't have a plan. I didn't get on there planning there was some luck in how early I got on social media. Yeah. For sure. There's luck a lot of times with these things, but it also, I think it has taught me, maybe that's another lesson. It's taught me how important consistency is in almost everything we do in life. It's just showing up, not having to be perfect, just show up. Yeah. If you just keep showing up, you naturally evolve and things get better, and not to care so much. I could just keep thinking of lessons because I'm a natural people pleaser, and that leads into that. Don't worry so much about what people think. Just show up. You don't have to be perfect. And this is coming from one of the biggest people pleasers ever. I'm a highly agreeable to a major fault, worry way too much about what people think. And I'm trying to get better. But I think I have definitely learned on social media, you can't please everyone. And you just keep showing up and you stay true to your mission of trying to help people. And it'll keep building.
I love that. I love it. You're an inspiration in that way too. It just in the platform that you've built, because that's what I've done. I was a college professor for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And I left the classroom to teach in the bigger school of life because I feel called to make a bigger impact as well. And so I'm at the beginning stages of that now. And it's really exciting to see someone like you who is just killing it. And so you're an inspiration.
That's amazing. I feel like these podcasts are always kind of a bummer because is a one-way conversation.
I know you don't know anything about
it. Yeah, but what did you teach?
Writing. And writing, English composition, all things like literature, a little bit of that. So mostly composition and writing.
Yeah.
Essay writing. Mm-hmm.
Does it feel like that knowledge, that kind of specialty helps in conversations with podcasting?
Yes. Yeah. And because I'm combining everything that I've done in my career now in this format. I've also done a lot of artistic things. I was in photography for a while. I was on the board of an arts organization for many years. I curated art shows. And so I had that. And I also have a master's in psychology. Wow. So I take my education background, my psychology background, and my art background and combined it into this whole platform.
That is amazing.
I'm loving it.
That is amazing. Yeah. Talk about eclectic backgrounds. That is unbelievable. Because I think about that too. Just I was talking about how I grew up and those kind of influences and how they shape you. You've got an amazing set of things.
And that's why I love the life story aspect of it, because of course I've helped people write and tell stories for so long, but the idea that realizing every single thing in your life has been happening to make you the person you are, even the bad things. And that's magical when you can really harness that and grab a hold of it and use it to propel you into the future of your dreams. That's magical. That's what I want people to be able to see. And plus I want people to be able to connect. I want people to be able to see one another and connect and have that, like we were talking about with COVID, it was definitely a time of isolation and a lot of other negative experiences that we need to bounce back. And this is the way I'm kind of bouncing back myself and also helping other people too.
I think it's such a powerful thing because honestly, podcasts are a lot of what helped me bounce back. I think podcasts are, because you get into these ruts where you're in that cyclical thought pattern And when you're isolated, you don't have much feedback helping you figure out. You'll just kind of spin your wheels and you don't know what direction to go. And for me, a lot of it was just listening to different podcasts with these exact very similar themes to what I think almost kind of like self-growth. I'm naturally like to look at those things, but
me too.
you're curious about how you're feeling and what's going on. And podcasts, the tools that I learned in podcasts, so many of the mental health tools and just health tools have been things I've learned on podcasts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
because it's like the self-led model, I think, lends itself very well to mental health and personal growth, because I know so many people who've been in therapy for years and they still aren't where they want to be, or you've read all the books and you're still just not getting it. But when you're able to hear a person talk or relate to someone else's story through a podcast or through a YouTube video or something like that, it's a different way of looking at yourself, because then you're actually looking in a mirror and able to have that reflected back to you.
Yeah.
And the self-led model, I think there's so much that we can do, so much healing, so much growth that we can do. And we just need to believe in our own power.
Yeah. Stories are so powerful. And I think so many podcasts, you're just innately hearing someone else's story, even if they're talking very specifically about what they do or something. But I think you're right. When you hear someone else's story, it allows you to kind of look at your situation from this sort of third person outside. You can kind of step outside yourself, and it is very powerful. And it'd be curious. That's another thing that'd be interesting to look at from a research standpoint. People kind of in therapy talking directly about their symptoms, that versus listening to a story of someone who has similar issues or think challenges, and which one, because it's always kind of looking at, there's a lot of information, but what thing motivates the person to change their behaviors? It'd be interesting to look at kind of those two, because for me, learning from other people and hearing their story, I think is more powerful for me to make a change.
Yeah, because you have to get to that third step. Like in your model, it's called the embodiment. I use the model of Bloom's taxonomy, because when you get to the top of the scale of thinking, the levels of thinking, at the top is creation. And so in order to change your thinking, you have to create something new. And it's like the same thing you're doing with the body. And that's where the shift happens. That's where you grow. That's where you get out of the funk. That's where you treat the injury or whatever it is that you're working on. It has to be a change that takes place.
So cool. Oh my goodness, there's so much of what that would totally tie into.
I know. Well, we'll have to talk again. We'll keep in touch. I would love to keep in touch. I love what you're doing. And also, just to let everyone know, they can follow you at Rehab Science. Join the 1.1 million other people that are following Tom on social media, and definitely buy this masterpiece of a book this is a showpiece. It's a treasure to have in your library, because it's like, if something happens to you and you pull your back or you wrench your neck, you could open up this book and find out what you can do to start before you go into physical therapy, or before you take that step. See if you can handle it at home first.
Well, thank you. I think, like we were talking about before, this self-led kind of model, that's what the book was. And I was talking before about, you want to have research evidence, you want to have clinical experience, and that's what we try to do in the book. I mean, the book has almost 500 research references. It's not just my anecdotal, this is what I think works. It's a combination of working with patients. I've been a PT, 17 years as a PT. And then what does the research also say? And here are programs that merge those two things. So I hope I try to tell people too, that even though it's called Rehab Science, most people think of those exercises as only things you do when you have pain or injury, but they're all mobility and strengthening exercises. So those are things that keep you healthy too, when you're not in pain or injury. So I hope too that people who get it will use it, of course, when they have something that's bothering them, but also you could just go through the programs are on 3 phases. You could just pick out exercise from phase 1, one from phase 2, and one from phase 3, and use it as a way to keep your system healthy. So I hope that people will think about it in that way too.
Yeah, because you use the word prehab, which I loved.
It was kind of it was kind of a term we used to use for before surgery, because we have research showing that people who strengthen and work on mobility before surgery recover faster. So look at total knee replacements and things. But so then that prehab term just kind of started referring to everything you can do to help prevent injuries. So Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, may we all have a prehabbed life.
That's right. Exactly.
Thank you so much, Tom. It was wonderful speaking with you.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me. This is awesome. Thank you.